Being a creator right now is weird. It's hard to tell what's real anymore, in online spaces especially, because often content is designed and edited and presented to prioritize engagement. And often what is the most engaging is what incites the most emotion. And unfortunately, anger and rage is one of the most effective of those emotions at spiking that engagement. Because that's the thing with stuff online, is that in order to be profitable, it has to be engaging. As in, there have to be demonstrable key metrics that a viewer has interacted with and spent time with a post. Basically, the more people interact with your video, the wider it gets shown. People have reverse engineered this and employed tactics in order to boost that engagement. A lot more people are learning shortcuts and tricks to artificially boost their numbers in less than ethical ways, if you ask me. So much so that it's reached the mainstream media. I'm worried about that. What do I mean? So, have you guys ever heard of the term engagement bait? You've heard of clickbait before, something that will be so outrageous that you feel like you have to click to understand what the headline is. Engagement bait is similar. Engagement bait is any piece of content or tactic used that ups engagement on a piece of content. Engagement can range from increasing comments or increasing shares or increasing watch time. That's why creators are always saying, don't forget to like and subscribe. The more people hit those buttons on certain videos, the more that video gets shown to other people. And I think that there's various forms of engagement bait, and not all of them are as harmful as others. Now, arguably, engagement bait has been around since the invention of the internet.
It's almost as if we've gone through a couple of different phases in major trends of engagement bait.
Early on, there was a discovery phase before people were really aware of the social mores of the internet and online etiquette. And so that's when you get basically people telling you how to interact with a post. Forwarding emails so you don't have 7 years of bad luck, or like this photo if you don't hate Jesus. Leave a comment if you don't want 7 puppies to get stomped on. That sort of thing. Granted, I am so sure that this type of engagement bait is alive and well on Facebook and with people who are not chronically online or have a different social culture digitally. Grandma really does think that these puppies are going to get stomped on if she doesn't like the video. And your little cousin does think that Momo's going to get him if he doesn't leave a comment. And to some extent that makes sense, right? Then in the era of the BuzzFeed video type virality, the most important key metric became shares, and so the name of the game became relatability.
Girlfriends are like this, boyfriends are like that, let's have every single demographic try every other demographic's food, etc. There's universal relatability that is attempting to click into human relationships and thus be dispersed further.
You see this today with people making videos centered around a certain person's name. It's sort of the equivalent of like a souvenir license plate at like a gas station, where they'll have every single type of name, because the idea is that every single person has a name. So when you see the name Michael or whatever, you think of a person, you think of somebody, and that will make you want to send that thing to that person named Michael, or buy that license plate for your Michael. And some of this is more inoffensive than others. Some of it's really clever. There's one of my favorite versions of this is there's a guy who does nicknames for every name, and they're very fun.
Josh Pitt, Josh Waganda, Peace and Josh Barity.
Even things you wouldn't think of, like there's somebody on Spotify that makes poop songs for every single name in the book, so that on somebody's birthday you can send it to that person, and it's just that guy saying that person's name with the word poop after it. Amanda, poop, 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 poop. Again, that's not as nefarious or worrisome.
Then, in the era of clickbait, engagement bait was aimed at harnessing human curiosity. What is the answer to this question? How is 5 Minute Crafts going to use this glue gun and human tooth, or whatever?
Some of them are irritating, like that's when there'll be videos that people will post of like making spaghetti on an entire table, or like making intentionally bad cooking. The hope is that people will watch that, be like, this is crazy, that looks disgusting, leave a comment. Unwittingly, the commenter has boosted that person's engagement, okay? But usually those accounts don't go mega viral because there's this kind of obvious lack of authenticity that gets old eventually.
Most recently, the trend with engagement bait is clicking into people's need for righteousness. And I mean that in 2 ways.
One, there's engagement bait with intentional mistakes. You might have noticed this, creators doing things like saying slightly incorrect things, because beyond just being curious, humans also love correcting other people. So mispronouncing a word or coloring something red and saying it was yellow, it's all in the hopes that somebody will take the time to sit down and comment, oh, don't you mean blah 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 color? And it works, or it has. But the most effective method, a method so effective that it probably predates the internet and is going to continue, is inciting human emotions, and more often than not, anger.
Rage bait
Just throws gasoline on a fire in a really worrisome way. Implementation of rage bait can range from irritating in the form of like somebody making, a cake in a toilet. Where this starts to get dangerous though, I think, is in the coverage of real world events. And to discuss this, I'd like to focus on the most recent Los Angeles demonstrations that have been happening. And granted, I don't super want to come on here and make a ton of political commentary. That's not really what my channel is for, and I don't feel super educated on the topic in order to even have that discussion well. However, having been living in Los Angeles, my experience of what has been happening the past couple of weeks is completely different than the way that it's been being depicted in the media. And I think that is, at the very least, interesting, if not scary. So essentially, what's been happening is that even in the first Trump presidency, Los Angeles has considered itself a sanctuary city, i.e., they don't tend to comply with any federal laws that come in that are anti-immigration. We're just not really going to pursue those. However, Trump has been cracking down via ICE on anti-immigration, and they've been conducting raids in LA. Los Angeles is a city with a massive Latinx population, and so that's absolutely not flying, especially because apparently these people have been being rounded up in places like Home Depot parking lots or like car washes.
And in response, the people of LA have been taking to the streets to demonstrate their discontent.
And it's interesting because depending on who you ask, what's been happening can either be called riots or protests. And both forms of that language have been used by different sources. There have been some really dramatic images, stuff like driverless cars on fire, broken men businesses. There was an Australian reporter who got shot by a rubber bullet and caught in the crossfire.
You just shut the You okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
Are you okay?
According to Wikipedia, there have been over 30 acts of violence specifically targeted to journalists and members of the media. And I'm not gonna lie, the images are gnarly. They do look like they're out of a war zone.
So much so that the coverage would make you believe that the entire city is on fire. Now, taking a step back, however, as a person who is on the ground here, my life has been largely unaffected by any of the things that have been going on that have been covered in the news. And multiple people have reached out to me asking me if I'm all right. And at most, there was a person who was late to dinner with me because they had to route around some traffic. That's literally it. At least in a practical sense. In an emotional sense, it's been taxing and worrisome. So because of this, there are demonstrations,
specifically in support of Los Angeles' population of
illegal immigrants, undocumented citizens. Do you see how the language can be split when I'm talking about this? Do I say illegal immigrants and have all of the context that comes with that terminology, or undocumented citizens, workers, and everything that comes there? These demonstrations have also been occurring on the same days as Trump has planned a military parade supposedly celebrating the anniversary of the armed forces, but which also occurs on his birthday. And historically, the American government, and historically, we've shied away from military parades because they tend to be associated with like dictatorships, like in Nazi Germany and in North Korea. So they've been called the No Kings rallies for that reason.
As an aside, after this parade happened, ironically enough, people were complaining about how sloppy the marching looked and comparing it to other countries and how nicely they look lined up. But my gut instinct is telling me that they intentionally chose not to march in step because they were trying to avoid that optic of it looking like a fascist regime. But I digress.
But what I do think is interesting is the way that it's been documented and presented. And I think that that strongly affects the way that a culture will remember it. So I'm more on the side of referring to it as protests, partially because it is in such a small area that a majority of the people who I know, who are granted not super civically engaged, didn't even know that it was happening. However, there are some massively incendiary clips that have come out of it that are scary for people who are not in the city to see. And to some extent, yeah, it looks like the city is on fire.
After a few days, Trump even called in the National Guard to aid in the situation.
Trump calling in the National Guard was received as an overreaction by Los Angeles, and I won't say made things worse, but definitely didn't feel necessary to anyone who was on the ground here. However, the narrative that is being painted by those viral clips would make it feel reasonable to bring out military might. Reasonable if you were someone like Trump. I'll put it like that. But I can tell you, all of the local coverage, first of all, every person who I've seen going to the riots has been very specifically telling other people to remain peaceful. Basically, my experience was that there were more people in my feed being like, here's how to protest peacefully. By the way, don't incite violence, and explaining how to stay safe in those situations. The videos and clips that I've seen have talked about the protest being mostly peaceful, even mentioning that the one that they went to, there was a person who threw a water bottle and the entire protest stopped and told them to step back in line. All of that pales in comparison to the moments where there are uses of rubber bullets and tear gas and the National Guard being called in, for crying out loud. But that's because the stuff that people see makes the situation seem so much worse and scarier than it actually is. Granted, partisan coverage of news is not new. I mean, everyone knows that, like, the news now is more focused on entertainment and getting viewers for commercials than actually reporting on the truth. And there's definitely been studies that have been done that take the language that's been used in different outlets and kind of compared them on the same topic, just to see which way information is being presented and swayed. It's fascinating the way that it's presented. I was watching Fox News, not by choice, it was just on in my gym, but the headlines that they said were so incendiary. It was like anger over Biden's, or something, somebody boots Biden's berry pickers, which is such aggressive language that is designed to make whoever's viewing it angry or scared. I think it's just worrisome now that the narrative is being written by the stuff that has the most virality potential, because the truth is very rarely algorithmically engaging. It's not exciting. It doesn't make people mad, or the thousands and thousands of peaceful protesters don't lead to the same amount of engagement of a photo of an on fire vehicle. It thus doesn't get prioritized in people's feeds, and that then becomes the narrative, and that's worrisome. And it's just going to increasingly get easier and easier for people to lie, and especially when those lies are rewarded, when those lies are the things that get the most exposure. But I don't think people really trust the news anymore. And it's scary. It's scary partially because these policies have real world implications. I'm a teacher. I work with kids, and my coworkers have had to have discussions at their other jobs in the inner city being like, okay, what do we do if ICE agents show up at the studio? Here's the back route exit for these students. That's crazy. That's crazy. And worrisome. Oh, I'm worried again. Anyway, just an interesting thought. Just get a couple of sources for any of your news that lands on your feed. And that's going to get, and then trying to find the truth is going to get increasingly harder and harder because of AI. I have an entire video's worth of thoughts on that. But it feels like by week it's getting better and better at mimicking reality, and it's going to get harder and harder to tell what is truth from what is fiction. And so it's just increasingly is going to have to be like, we as citizens are going to have to get better at cross-checking everything. Even credible news sources is going to have to take digging and effort. I will say there are websites that will present information in a nonpartisan way. The Associated Press is pretty good about just giving the facts without any colored language in any direction. Snopes is pretty good for debunking popular conspiracies and myths. But yeah, it's just going to take a lot more effort to have to question everything. And I think the stage is set for the truth to get lost amongst a lot of spectacle. Thank you so much for watching. Please consider liking and subscribing. And stay safe out there, everyone.